We're now going to talk about an approach to psychology called evolutionary psychology. It's based on Darwin's main principle of natural selection. The principle states that among the range of inherited trait variations, those that lead to increased reproduction and survival will most likely to be passed on to succeeding generations. So the successful species are those that happen to have the right variations called mutations. And random errors in gene replication lead to a change in the sequence of nucleotides, which in turn leads to changes in body, in behavior, in mind. It's the source of all genetic diversity, and it's the mechanism by which Darwin explained how species became different. And in this case, evolutionary psychologists will be looking for behaviors across cultures in humankind that they see having evolved via mutations and natural selection. Now let's talk specifically about evolutionary psychology. Evolutionary psychology can be called the study of evolution of behavior and the mind using the principles of natural selection, as we stated before. It examines similarities across cultures. That is, it looks at various cultures and see if people behave more or less alike. There's an assumption that if you do find similarities across cultures, that implies the outcome of some sort of natural selection. Evolutionary psychology has a heavy focus on sex and gender. Gender, in psychology, are the characteristics, whether they're biologically or socially influenced, by which people define male and female. It's not just biology, it's also social influence. Gender roles play a big part in evolutionary psychology. Gender roles are the, quote, right way for females and males to act. Even in gender equality societies, male and female roles often differ. Evolutionary psychologists study preferences for much of their research. They've looked at different preferences in men and women. They've found, all over the world, that men prefer attractive physical features that suggest youth and health. Women, on the other hand, seem to prefer resources and social status before attractive physical features and youth and health. Since evolutionary psychologists have found this in many places in the world, they're suggesting that this is a product of natural selection and an adaptation that allows people to be successful in both reproduction and survival. Just for fun, let's see if you could rate your top 5 characteristics that you would like to see in a potential mate. Would religious orientation be important? Good heredity? How about adaptability? Do you want kindness and understanding in your potential mate? Do you want them to be physically attractive? Do you want them to have good health? Intelligence? Do you want them to be a good earner? How about sharing a desire for children? Would you like to have a good homemaker? Do you want somebody with an exciting personality? How about a college graduate? All of these are potential characteristics you might look for in a mate, but which ones would float to the top? And in fact, there have been a number of surveys that have asked these and very similar questions, and we'll look at those next. Here is the result of one such study. This was done with young Americans. It lists the characteristics that were ranked by males and compares them to the characteristics that were ranked by females. Perhaps the most amazing thing about this is how overlapping they are. Both of them want a kind and understanding mate. Second place was intelligence. Third place for males was physical attractiveness. That lands in 6th for females. Exciting personality, good health, adaptability for males, and adaptability for females. So if you take the top 6, they share those in common. It's just that men put physical attractiveness just a little bit higher than females do. The upshot of this list and other similar lists is that males and females actually look for very similar qualities in potential mates. And this runs somewhat counter to the fact that there are innate and powerful differences between males and females in terms of preference for mates. Now let's look at some of the critiques of evolutionary psychology. Evolutionary psychology works backwards from the effect to find an explanation. It's sometimes called hindsight explanations. It's very hard to run a true evolutionary study. Does it support genetic determinism? This is not a trivial question, especially in the field of ethics and morality. If we behave the way we behave because of our genetics, and there's not much you can do about it, then perhaps infidelity in marital life is just simply explained as an evolutionary psychology determined behavior. Social consequences of genetically driven behavior. If we are who we are because we're very much like animals, then it's very difficult to talk about taking people and holding them morally responsible for their behaviors. Some testable hypotheses, however, we do have. For example, do we favor those whose genes we most share? You can do some pretty good studies about how people are willing to give to close relatives versus distant relatives, to sacrifice themselves in order to protect others. All of these are somewhat testable hypotheses, and in fact have been tested, and have been shown to have some merit. Gender roles vary within cultures and across cultures. And because they do, this works somewhat against the position that evolutionary psychologists take, because after all, sex is a pretty important part of reproduction and survival. So if in fact we find varying sex mores or sexual behaviors across cultures and even within cultures, evolutionary psychology is not in a good position to talk about this, especially in terms of how long it takes to get genetic variation within a population. So all of these things are criticisms of evolutionary psychology, but it still has some very important points to make.